Welcome to this edition of AFMC.
I'll tell you how I got better. I'm
Glad to be here.
But a mission to
Delivery of
improve.
I think that we're going to talk about everybody's.
Arkansas is the second highest prescriber.
Welcome to this episode of AFMC TV. I'm Robin Ledbetter. Thank you for joining us. Today I have with me Geania Dickey, and Geania is the owner of Dot to Dot Consulting, and she is at the forefront of expert in early childhood development and workforce here in the state of Arkansas. She also works with the Arkansas State University's Department of Childhood Services. So Geania, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about your work, and not only what you do with A-State, but in a number of ways for the state of Arkansas.
Yeah, I do. I think the simplest way to say it is I do systems work, and my systems always focus on the systems that support adults who support children. So I've recently had a project with UAMS looking at mental health for students. I can work with the Division of Children and Family Services around some workforce issues. So it's usually leadership and organizational management related.
So let's talk about, we're post-pandemic and we see a lot of behavioral health issues within the workforce, but particularly within child development. Tell me a little bit about that and what you're seeing.
Yeah, I think we had some challenges pre-pandemic, and I think things just got worse, right? So one of my favorite research projects is it launched in April of 2020 to ask parents across the country what their challenges were. And it was focused on very young children. Often we'll have information about families in public school settings because we have access to them, but we don't always have access to the families of 0 to 8 or 0 to 5. And it was stark what was happening and how overwhelmed they felt and how they were starting to track also how the children were feeling. And it was just, it mirrors itself, right? The more stressed the family was, the more stressed the children were. And I don't know that we've gotten better necessarily. I think one of the, hindsight's 2020, we said, okay, it's over, let's go back without acknowledging what had happened during that time. And so I think we've got some families that are really struggling with that.
Is that an Arkansas thing, or is that's nationwide?
Across the country.
And what do you see as the steps to make a change for that?
I think acknowledging it, I think that's one of the things. In that research project I did with UAMS, I had the pleasure to do some focus groups with families of students who had sought behavioral health care. And we were really looking at the gap analysis. What's available to them, what do they need, and where's that middle in between? And I think there was one mom who said, I asked the question, like, what can public school do to support our kids? With so much emphasis over a Zoom focus group, she says, acknowledge it. Acknowledge that our kids are struggling, acknowledge that they need some support around their social and emotional health, as well as how they interact with each other. There was a lot of gap in this really important developmental stage around peer interaction. And I had another mom who was also a middle school teacher who said, we just need to help them learn how to be humans and interact with other humans. And she did not say that lightly. It was just, I've got a classroom of children and I'm trying to teach them English, but we got a lot of things happening behind the scenes that are interfering with that.
And there is a major correlation between adult stress and childhood behavior too.
Yeah, the rapid survey, the organization that's been doing that and still doing that on a monthly basis, that you can pull it up online and see graphs that just show the correlation just goes hand in hand.
And a lot of those things we see in adults, but what do we see in children? How do we identify that?
It doesn't look very different than when, we get a little cranky when we get stressed, we get a little distracted when we're stressed. It usually interferes with our sleep. So for young children, it's really the same. When you have nonverbal children, I think that's where we sometimes mistake fussiness for something other than what it is. And I think understanding that they can be really, I think very young children can be the most intuitive humans on the planet, and that they really do pick up from us. So when they can't verbalize what their concerns are, I think one thing a colleague of mine says that all behavior is communication. And I think that if you kind of take that mindset with children, when things aren't quite right, you know your children best. What do you think they're trying to tell you? I think, again, under appreciating kind of the long-term effect, separate from the pandemic, I have two grandchildren, 3 and 5, and the 3-year-old was in his childcare program when the tornado came through Little Rock several months ago. And he has mentioned that to me on 2 different occasions over a long period of time. So you're thinking about a 2-year-old that just has moderate verbal skills, and this incident happened, and everybody was safe, and everything was fine, but it's hanging in there, and he's old enough now to kind of just throw it out in a conversation occasionally, and I think that's a really telling example of what we don't always really realize what our children are dealing with.
And how does social development tie into all of this too?
You know, I'm big fan of Maslow's hierarchy, right? Just your basic food, clothing, and shelter. And when children don't feel safe, and they experience a lot of loss, right? If you just think about it from that way. So even if they were fortunate in their family and there was no loss of loved ones, there was probably a loss of interaction. Literally and figuratively, like they just didn't see their elder adults in their family, or they didn't have a chance. Maybe we got to Zoom with them or FaceTime with them, but we weren't cuddling them and reading them stories, right? Like, so there's loss during that time about those kind of interactions. And I think we're not quite over that feeling of loss in as far as, you know, getting our basic needs met. And so if my basic needs are not met, I'm not going to reach out and make friends. Like I'm focused on myself. So I think whether you're very young or whether you're a school-age child at middle school, one of those parents in the focus group talked about they're now young high schoolers, so would have been middle school age during the pandemic. They called her, she didn't answer the phone, and it created a lot of anxiety. So back to the thinking about what I'm walking around with, like worrying about a loss of parents during a pandemic as a 10, 12, 13-year-old. So and how something can trigger that when they don't answer, they don't pick up the phone when you call, and the worry that if we hadn't gone through this experience, probably wouldn't have happened, right? Like it didn't feel natural.
So many elements from the day-to-day basis, on a day-to-day basis,
Yes.
that affect kids in so many ways,
Yeah.
for sure. So let's talk about child care practitioners and those that are taking care of our kids during the day when we're at work. Why is it important to support their needs?
You know, I think we do need to focus on parents, and they are the child's primary teacher forever. But I think childcare can be a lot like other parts of our infrastructure that when it's working, we don't think a thing about it, right? I drove here with no problem, but if they've been doing construction, I'd notice, right? Like, so I think childcare is kind of like that, good roads. And when it breaks down, then we notice. And there was a lot of challenges for them during the pandemic, thinking about the stress that families felt. But we throw that on to early educators who are already struggling. UAMS did a wonderful workforce study in 2017, and it showed the level of food insecurity for our practitioners was 4 in 10. And if they were infant toddler teachers, it was 50%. So that was 2017, and then we had challenges beyond that. I think why we need to think about it, not just from an infrastructure standpoint, but there's a factoid that I'd love to share with people, and it's that if this baby starts in childcare as an infant, so her parents can go to work or school, and she stays until she starts kindergarten, she will have been in care for 11,500 hours. We will not duplicate that amount of time in public school until when she begins in kindergarten until the end of 9th grade.
Wow.
So when you think about this really critical brain development happening in 0 to 5, but then you add on the amount of hours that they're interacting with people outside of their home, that makes those people so important. And we have this trilemma, I call it, is cost, quality, and compensation. We can't really get to the level of quality because so much is about adult interaction and the importance of that attachment, as we mentioned with the families. When we've got practitioners who are stressed or food insecure or maybe have markers for depression, but I can't pay them more unless I charge the parents, right? So it's just this trilemma.
And what are resources for those practitioners that you see that are out there and needed?
You know, we did a really awesome thing in Arkansas prior to the pandemic. Most of the funds for childcare comes from the Child Care Development Fund through the Child Care Development grant through the feds. That covers vouchers, which is how we refer to it for low-income families, but also quality set-asides to improve the quality across the state. And Arkansas has really made some hard decisions and really wise ones over the years to improve that. And we got a little bump in money, and we started a scholarship program so that we could send practitioners back to school at almost no cost to them. So that's been in place, and during the pandemic, when the ARPA funds were made available, we got to up that scholarship. And now we have more than 300 practitioners across the state who are working on either a Child Development Associate's credential or an associate's degree or their bachelor's degree. But we don't have a compensation strategy, right? So you can come out of school and you can make a little bit more. But the truth is, most of my colleagues are going to be non-traditional students. They have children of their own. And I got to tell you, I'm not sure I'd go to class on, Tuesday and Thursday night every week and leave my school-age children at home for an extra 25 cents. And we really are talking about some really minor bumps in after receiving their education. If I'm in rural parts of the state or if I'm a woman of color, it's a smaller bump than with my Caucasian counterparts. So there is some inequity around that compensation.
So tell me how geography and race plays a role in inequity for this specific thing.
I think we look at some cost models, and in Arkansas, we typically base them on rural or urban, but you'll find variation even amongst that, where Northwest Arkansas has got some different challenges than Little Rock right now. The economy is great in Northwest Arkansas, and we've got an influx of population, and often they've come from somewhere else, so we've got a higher mid-income range. And so those programs are having a challenge in hiring because they can't pay what they're paying in retail and fast food. So what we're seeing sometimes is we've got an influx of money that comes in through the federal government, through Head Start, Early Head Start as an example, but it's for a very specific population. And then we have state money that pays for public pre-K, our Arkansas Better Chance or ABC programs, also very specific population. So there's challenges, I say, across the state. Sometimes it's about the pay for staff and where the money comes from. And sometimes it's really about the challenges that families face. Because if I qualify for Early Head Start, it's wonderful care with high quality. But if I make just a little bit too much for that, I might be eligible for a voucher, but if we push it up just a tad more, I'm kind of left out. And if I'm in an urban area that's got a population base that warrants really having some high quality program with some high quality tuition, then I've got some people that may be able to afford high quality. And then there's a big group in the middle, and I feel like it's gotten bigger as time has gone on.
Tell me what you want healthcare providers, community partners, those that are working kind of on the ground floor and see these parents every day and see the kids. What are you wanting them to know? What's important for those people to know about how they're supposed to educate their patients in that information to get back to make a difference within the child care practitioner?
Yeah, I think a couple things come to mind. There's a colleague in Colorado who works for the county health department who really has made a focus on early ed as his work. And when I asked him the question, he said that child care and early childhood education, especially for infants and toddlers and its quality, was the biggest public health concern he had and that the nation had, really, to be honest. So I think we need to start thinking about this interwoven disciplines, right? I can talk about early childhood as an early educator, but then, I'm kind of preaching to the choir sometimes. And so I need to broaden out my choir and understand maybe what's happening in their community. I think maybe the first challenge I would give them is how much infant toddler care is available in your community and what's the quality? Do you know? And you can go to the Better Beginnings website. The Office of Early Childhood has that. You can look by zip code. And so the information's out there. But thinking about that as you're visiting with the children that you see and the families that you're serving, like what are they? Where are these children when they're not with their families? And how can we support what's happening in our communities?
Well, I see the future is bright, Gina, under your resources and all that you do to be an advocate to make our state better. And I appreciate it. And thank you so much for being here today and talking about your work.
Thank you so much for bringing light to this topic with a group that's not part of the choir. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. And that's it for this episode of AFMC TV. Have a great day, and thanks for watching.